First of all, good afternoon. I'm Delegate Keith Haynes, Chair of Public Safety and Administration on the House Committee of Appropriations. We are now calling to order somewhat of a historic hearing as it is joint with the Senate Subcommittee on Public Safety, Transportation, and the Environment. And Chair McCray and your subcommittee members and staff, it's good to be with you on a joint hearing today. And we understand that this will be the process that we will be following throughout our budget hearings due to COVID-19 and trying to remain as safe as possible and doing our work virtually for the remainder of this session. And so we will be, I understand, just for purposes of conducting these meetings jointly, the chair presiding will be on an alternating basis as we move forward. And just for a little bit of housekeeping information, we're going to ask that at the end of the budget analyst presentation, that you would raise your hand in the box that's provided in participants. I think we've all been through this before. And as chair, for House members, I will call or recognize you to ask your questions. And accordingly with the same, with the Senate members, your chair, Chair McCray, will call on the Senate members as we move forward. And that will be also true as we have the agency responses after the agency representatives have completed their response and testimony. As chair for the House subcommittee, I will ask whether there are any questions, and if so, I will call them in the respective manner that I mentioned earlier, and Chairman McCray will do the same for the Senate. As we move beyond that preliminarily or threshold opening of questions, if there are subsequent questions that come from either committee, whether it's from the House subcommittee or the corresponding Senate subcommittee, the appropriate chair for the member will recognize, meaning that I would recognize all House members and Chairman McCray would recognize all Senate members as we move forward, just as if we're doing a joint hearing in the joint hearing room and we're physically present. There is one other one technical announcement I would like to make, and that is, if for some reason, as presiding chair, there is an internet interruption, disconnection, or technical difficulty, I have asked in advance the vice chair to just sort of pick up until I am able to come back on. Apparently with the wind situation, there's been a little bit of technical difficulty moving back and forth with some internet connection. So just a little bit of heads up there. And with that, I don't think that there are any other preliminary statements I would like to make. I will now ask before I ask the Chair McCray of the Budget Subcommittee, I do want to mention that I want to give Mr. Dodd of the Subsequent Injury Fund and each of the agency speakers the option of sharing their screen if they have something to present. So you would just make that known that you want to share your screen, and the appropriate staff for the committee, we'll make sure that that happens. And with those comments, before we begin, I would like to turn it over to Chair McCray if he has any additional remarks to make before we get started with today's budget hearing.
Thank you, Chairman Haynes. I just wanted to say this is a very unique opportunity to be able to share with our colleagues from the House of Delegates. I would be remiss if I didn't take the time out to acknowledge who we're joined by with our senators. We have Senator Saling, Senator Edwards, and Senator Peters will be joining us momentarily, and just look forward to each and every agency report. And thank you once again, Chairman Haynes, for this opportunity.
One last announcement before we get started. I do want to mention this. I do know that there are at least 1 or 2 members on the House side that have bill hearings. And just as if we are present physically in committee rooms, those individuals will leave the hearing to go to their bill hearings and return if time permits. And I'm sure, Chairman, that will be the same thing on your side as well, correct? Okay. All right. With that, we would turn to the budget hearing for the subsequent injury fund. We have our budget analyst, Mr. Jason Kramer, who is ready to provide the analysis for the subsequent injury fund. Mr. Kramer, you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess I need to share my screen now. Sherry, can you let me do that?
I've actually already made you a co-host, Jason.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
But no.
All right. Hopefully you're seeing a budget analysis now.
No.
No. There we go. How about now?
Oh,
Not yet.
There we go. How about now?
yes.
There we go.
Yes.
All right. This is the first one, so bear with me. I think we got it now. All right. So my name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the subsequent injury fund. The subsequent injury fund compensates injured workers whose pre-existing conditions are worsened by current injury. Who are worsened by a current injury to encourage the employment of disabled individuals by limiting employer liability. I'll start with the first chart on the first page, the fiscal 22 budget change. This chart here on page 1 of the analysis shows that the subsequent injury fund's fiscal 2022 allowance slightly decreases to $2.5 million, and that allowance is entirely in special funds. Moving next to Exhibit 1. Exhibit 1 shows that 85% of the allowance is for the subsequent injury fund is for personnel, with contractual services taking up the next biggest share of the budget. I'll move next to Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 shows the areas of change in the subsequent injury fund's allowance. The only significant change is in contractual services due to funding in fiscal 2021 for an actuarial study that is done by the agency once every 5 years. I'm moving next to Exhibit 3. Exhibit 3 shows the fund's revenues since fiscal 2016. The subsequent injury fund's revenues are derived from an assessment on Workers' Compensation Commission awards. The assessment that is dedicated to the subsequent injury fund has typically been 6.5% of the assessment or on the assessment. But Chapter 495 of 2020, some legislation that you all passed last session, reduced that amount to 5.5%, which reduces the subsequent injury fund's revenue. And that change was made to benefit the uninsured employers fund, which I will discuss in their analysis in a week or two. On top of that, the Workers' Compensation Commission canceled or delayed hearings due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which further limited the subsequent injury fund's revenue stream. Fiscal 2021 revenues are projected to be about $7.4 million lower than fiscal 2020, with about $4.2 million of that due to the assessment reduction. Next on Exhibit 4, this exhibit shows the fund's balance and change over time. The fund balance is estimated to close fiscal 2021 at about $105 million, which would be the first decrease in the balance of the fund in over a decade. In the most recent actuarial study done by the fund, which was completed in 2016, it found liabilities to the fund of between $195 and $385 million, depending on what
Yeah, can I speak to
assumptions,
Cherie, please?
what assumptions about mortality and discount rate
Yeah,
are
this
used.
is Ken Weaver. I'm
And
in the
Ken,
meeting with her,
you're
but I
not
need to
muted.
tell her something about the meeting.
Finally,
Yeah, we're in the meeting together, but I can't interrupt it to pass a message on to her. I just needed her.
recommended actions,
people
DLS
in
is
from the waiting
recommending.
room, So.
And we need you to mute yourself, buddy.
I'm going to ask, if I can just interrupt you 1 second, Jason. We're going to ask all committee members and all staff if they would make sure that they are muted unless they are speaking, just so we don't have some background noise. So go right ahead. Thank you so much.
So that just to close it all up, DLS is recommending concurring with the governor's allowance for the subsequent injury fund, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kramer, for your analysis. I do have one question before opening it up to the committee, and that is, I know that this is the subsequent injury fund is deals with special funds and is really driven from the assessment originating from the Workers' Compensation Commission awards and et cetera. Has there been any insight on how COVID-19 and the caseloads having or the docket on the Workers' Compensation Commission having been ceased for a while had on the impact of the fiscal impact on the subsequent injury fund at all?
Right, so that, if we go back to Exhibit 3 here, it sort of shows that the revenues declined by about $7.4 million. I'd say about 2/3 of that is due to the change in the assessment that was passed in law last session. The other third of it is likely due to the reduced number of hearings, which reduces the reduced number of workers' compensation hearings, which then reduces the amount of awards that the assessment can be applied on.
Okay. Are there any questions from members of the House? Okay, hearing none. Chair McCray, are there any questions on the Senate side? Hearing or seeing none, we will now move to our agency representative. We have Mr. Edgar Dodd, Mr. Edgar G. Dodd III, Executive Director of the Subsequent Injury Fund, Ms. Rose M. Hunt, Fiscal Services Administrator 2 of the Subsequent Injury Fund. You can go ahead and begin when you're ready. And if you need to share your screen, please just let the committee staff know so we can accommodate you. You can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the invitation to join both committees again this year, albeit under these extraordinary circumstances. My name is Edgar Dodd. I am the Director of the Maryland Subsequent Injury Fund. I'd like to thank Mr. Kramer for his thorough summary and analysis. There was a question at the beginning, before the actual hearing began. Someone asked about written testimony from the fund in advance of this hearing. I had talked to Mr. Kramer about this, and the thoroughness of his analysis negated the necessity for us to submit written testimony. So I hope you understand that. Once again, I thank Mr. Kramer, and I'd also like to recognize Mr. Jeff Woolbrecht. He's our DBM budget analyst, and Mr. Woolbrecht is invaluable to us in answering our questions throughout the year. And before I turn it over to questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to acknowledge the 16 Subsequent Injury Fund employees who I am privileged to work with every day. Our record of uninterrupted biweekly payments to injured and disabled Maryland workers remains intact, and that's a tribute to the professionalism of our staff meeting the challenges of working from home. And I think it's important that the legislature knows that. I appreciate and agree with Mr. Kramer's analysis, and I request approval of the subsequent injury fund FY22 budget allocation. And we'd be happy to answer any questions either committee has of either myself or to Ms. Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dodd. I do have one question. I do acknowledge the fact that the budget, that the DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. And I do have one question as it relates to UE, uninsured employers, and what we did last year statutorily and reducing the assessment by 1%. And I know the reasons why we did that, to sort of shore up that particular fund for 1 year. Did that have any adverse impact on your operations, that 1 year reduction in the assessment?
Absolutely, sir, it did. I think Mr. Kramer mentioned that when he acknowledged the decrease in our assessments in 2021. I agree with you. I understand why that adjustment was made, but it was my understanding that there's a sunset provision on that reduction because it's not sustainable long-term to the subsequent injury fund for that 1% decrease to continue. It's a few $1,000,000 a year. However, it's going to add up, and there's a reason that we were funded at the 6.5 level. And as Mr. Kramer mentioned, the 2016 actuary study mentioned the unfunded liability. We are going to have another actuary study performed this year, and we are confident that without this 1%, we're going to have to ask the actuary to look at it both ways, the 6.5% and the 5.5. And our goal is to eliminate this unfunded liability. I think that's a responsible thing to do. Okay. But in response to your direct question, it has had an effect. Mathematically, a 1% assessment reduction on 6.5 works out to over 12%. That's a lot of money. Okay. So we understand why it was made, and we certainly want to be a partner in trying to help another state agency, but a permanent reduction is not sustainable for us. That's our opinion, and we'll have the actuary address that issue.
When do you anticipate that the study will be completed?
Well, it's on the cusp of being advertised, sir. As far as the bid process goes, we're waiting for the final approval of the DBM agency responsible for reviewing and giving the final okay for it to be published. Usually these take a few months, so I fully anticipate, sir, no later than the end of the summer, that this actuary study will be completed.
Okay. I think I see Vice Chair Proctor. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Could we go back to your slide having to do with the personnel? I think it was about 2 or 3 slides ago. Could we go back to that?
Mr. Kramer is controlling that.
Yep, 1 second. Let's see. Is this what you're talking about, Delegate?
No, the pie shape.
I think it's on page 2.
Go.
Not that one.
Oh, I'm in the wrong agency. There we go. How about that?
Yeah, right here. So do you know 85% of the budget is personnel? How many people, can you tell me, are we talking about here?
17.
17 people, okay. And then what kinds of services will the contractual people provide for you?
Well, I'd like if I may ask Mr. Kramer to adjust that $201,000 figure, because we don't have an actual contractual employee in place right now. Mr. Kramer, could you define for us what the contractual services?
That's contracts with outside vendors, not contractual employees. So any services that are provided by contractual contracts that you have.
Okay, so if you're talking about,
So
you know,
Object 8 funding, basically.
okay. Rose, are you on the call? Okay, apparently not. The contractual services represented by this pie chart is not a person per se. I think we're talking about, you know, things in office, things that we contract with in terms of, you know, equipment, licensing things and things of that nature. It is not an individual.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any additional hands raised on the House side or Mr. Chairman on the Senate. Okay, with that would conclude our hearing for the subsequent injury fund. Mr. Dodd, thank you very much. And if
Thank you,
the
Mr. Chairman.
subcommittee, thank you so much. If the
Thank you.
subcommittee will now turn to the Workers' Compensation Commission. Again, we have our budget analyst, Mr. Jason Kramer. If you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Got it.
All right, thank you again. Let's try this again. All right, back to, so I'll now be presenting the analysis for the Workers' Compensation Commission. Workers' Compensation Commission administers the state workers' comp law. And I'll start here on page 1 with this first chart that shows the change across 3 fiscal years in the Workers' Compensation Commission's budget. The fiscal 2022 allowance slightly increased to $18.6 million, which is entirely in special funds. We'll go next to Exhibit 1. Exhibit 1 shows that 62% of the allowance is for personnel, with spending on the Commission's new case management system called CompHub, taking up about 16% of the allowance. That's an IT project there, revamping their case management system. Turning next to Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 shows the areas of change in the Workers' Compensation Commission allowance. The allowance grows only by about 1%, with small increases in personnel and IT costs. For moving next to the first key observation section of the analysis, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the Commission's operations, as you might guess. Hearings were canceled for much of March and all of April and May. The Commission began virtual hearings at the end of May and the beginning of June, but is only able to hear about 15 cases per docket compared to 25 cases as was typical before. Before the pandemic, the Commission typically had about 3,000 to 4,000 cases that were pending a hearing. This month, due to the delays and cancellations, it has about a little over 6,200 cases pending a hearing. Although by lengthening dockets and working extra time, the Commission has been able to whittle away at that backlog. As noted in the subsequent injury fund analysis that I just provided it, and as I will present for the uninsured employer fund in a couple of weeks, these delays impact not only the participants in the hearings, obviously, but also those 2 agencies that rely on the revenue from the Commission awards. Moving next to Exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 shows the factors that go into calculating the Workers' Compensation Commission's assessment on the state's insurers and self-insured entities. That assessment supports the operations of the Commission, as well as the Department of Labor's Workplace Fraud Act and occupational safety and health programs. The total assessment increased by $3 million, or about 8.1% in fiscal 20. That's due to the payroll base in that fiscal year increasing at a slower rate than the Commission's operating expenses. Finally, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay. I do have one question before opening up to the committees, and thank you very much for your analysis, Mr. Kramer. We do appreciate it. The question that I have is pretty much related back to that one big subject area that we're all are dealing with, and that is the impact of the COVID-19, and it relates to the caseloads or the dockets, I should say. In case I missed it earlier, I do know that you mentioned that the current backlog, when the analysis was done, was a little over 6,200 cases. Did you provide, or perhaps you did and I just missed it, on an average year, what that number would be?
At any given time prior to COVID and the cancellations, the typical number of pending cases would be about 3,000 to 4,000.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you so much. Are there any questions from the members of either committee? Seeing none, hearing none, we're going to thank Mr. Kramer and move to our agency representative. We have the Honorable R. Carl Allman, Chair of the Workers' Compensation Commission, Ms. Mary Ahern, Chief Executive Officer of the Workers' Compensation Commission, Mr. David E. Jones, Chief Financial Officer of the Workers' Compensation Commission, and Mr. James Moore, Director of Fiscal Services of the Workers' Compensation Commission. Welcome everyone, and Commissioner, Chair of, I should say, Allman, go ahead and begin when you're ready. Good to have you. If you can go ahead and just unmute your screen before you begin.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Haynes, Chairman McCray, and all the members of both the Senate and House subcommittees. I'm Carl Allman. I have the privilege of being the chair of the Maryland Workers' Compensation Commission. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you all today and express our appreciation to Mr. Kramer for his hard work and analysis of what we do in our budget. As he indicated, the commission is totally funded by assessments on insurance companies and self-insureds. So no money from the general fund comes to us for our operations. Let it also be said that, like everybody else, the pandemic has affected us enormously, but I am so very proud of our people and who have really stepped up, doing everything that they can to make our work process seamless and to provide the injured workers and the employers in our state the very best service that they deserve. And with that, I would like to also say that we appreciate the concurrence with the budget as outlined by the governor. We concur with concurrence. I would like to address a couple of the issues that I'm sure folks are interested in. We ceased at the end of March, we ceased in-person hearings and did not resume those in-person hearings until the 8th of June. We did have some video hearings take place beginning in May, and they were important, but they did not attack the issue that we had of so many cases being backlogged. Before beginning in June with the in-person hearings, we had to go through a total revamp of the way we operate, because we needed to make sure that the safety of the litigants, all the parties, all of our people who make the hearings happen, make sure that their safety was first and foremost. And I'm really proud of what they were able to do and call out in particular, our security folks who are absolutely critical to the way that we're operating now. We have not stopped having in-person scheduled appointed hearings since June 8th. Our volume is not as, we're not able to hear as many cases as we were in the past because all of the cases have to be at a particular time. That has slowed us down. However, I am happy to say that since June, we have issued over 18,000 orders as a result of those hearings. And we went from having over 10,000 cases that needed to be set for hearing in May to now, I believe it's just under 4,000. And so we've made a huge dent in what was a pretty big backlog. Also, just to put it in perspective, we set hearings for cases when people file issues into cases, when there's a dispute that arises between the parties. And right now, our oldest cases where the issues have been filed are basically the middle of September. So we feel that we're really hitting the volume pretty well, and we'd like it to be better. But we also need to make sure that the safety of all the folks involved is first and foremost, as all of us do. The community has been terrific, and the lawyers and the employers and the insurance company, everybody has really stepped up and helped us. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the members of either subcommittee would like to ask.
Okay, Chairman, good to see you again.
Good to see
you. I do have to say that you have to tell a good colleague of mine who I served with on this subcommittee for many years. I said hello, and that's Delegate Almond. And we miss her down here. So I do have one question as it relates to COVID and the backlog, and it just sort of dawned on me as I was listening to your testimony. The backlog that was in existence or currently in existence, is that a prior or a pre-COVID backlog more so than a backlog since COVID? And the reason why I'm saying that is because most workers may not have been working, so they were not injured on the job. So is it more current or previous?
It's a really question, and I don't want to complicate it, but we don't really have any issues that were filed prior to the beginning of COVID that are. We are setting hearings. Basically, the oldest ones we have come mostly from September of 2020 and forward.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Are there questions from the members of the subcommittees? I see our chair on our corresponding committee on the Senate side, Chairman McCray. I will yield to you for any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Hayes, and thank you, Chairman Almond, for the extraordinary work that you and your team are doing. I had subsequent questions in reference to the same line that Chairman Hayes was referencing. I know that a number of different occupations have at least started to develop plans for when that appropriate time does happen that they can return to work. If you could speak to if the Workers' Compensation Commission has started to think about what does that look like when the appropriate time happens, and are you all forecasting, just because of the backlog and knowing that when folks are in disputes at some point in time, it is probably more contentious, especially for the worker themselves. So if you could speak to those two questions, that would be greatly appreciated. And thank you again for your service.
Thank you, Chairman McCray. I believe, if I understand the question correctly, the the folks at the commission have continued to work either by teleworking or in person. Our hearings have been reduced in number because we are having them individually scheduled as opposed to having the entire group of, say, 25 set at the beginning of the day. We are only able to schedule, say, 13 to 15, and that has that's made attacking the backlog a little bit more difficult. But I think maybe also what you're trying to get to is the question about whether we're going to see more issues filed as people get back to work. And I don't know if we will or we won't. We do have some, I believe that we have had approximately 900 cases involving allegations of COVID exposure as a related injury. And we are hearing those cases now. I mean, I think each one of us on the commission has heard at least a dozen or more of those. But I think that we will see more cases filed in all kinds of injuries, all related injuries, as more people get back to their normal work routines, and as the employment hopefully picks up. Does that answer your question, or was there something more specific that you'd like to answer?
Just for clarity, your meetings taking place virtual? The hearings taking place virtual or in person?
Both. We started doing some virtual hearings in May. Not at all happy with volume in terms of getting to the number of issues filed. So we began in-person hearings in June. And since June to, say, last week, we issued over 18,000 awards as a result of those hearings. So we've been very busy with in-person hearings around the state. All of our centers have opened, operating very differently, but all of them are open and operating.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions on the House side, Chairman McCray, I'm not sure, do you have any further questions on the Senate side? Okay, I think that brings us to the conclusion of our budget hearing for the Workers' Compensation Commission. And I do just want to acknowledge that we did receive a written response from the Workers' Compensation Commission, in addition to the chairman's response live today. So thank you very much. And that will conclude our hearing on the Workers' Compensation Commission. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. If the subcommittees would turn to our final agency department today, and that is the Community Supervision Department of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. We have, for our analysis, Mr. Jacob Cash, who will provide the budget analysis for today. If you need to share your screen, Mr. Cash, you can go ahead and do whatever is necessary with committee staff to make sure that happens. And you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Is that showing up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So today I'll be going over the community supervision analysis for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. These include the Maryland Parole Commission and the Division of Parole and Probation. So they both hear parole, release cases, make those decisions, and they also provide the staffing who supervises those who are released onto community supervision. So starting with the operating budget summary, there is $111.7 million in the fiscal 22 budget allowance, and that's a $2 million increase over the working appropriation, although it's level funded with fiscal 2020 actual spending. Now, the vast majority of their funding goes towards personnel, both regular and contractual employees, total about $100 million. The remainder is $11.5 million, and Exhibit 1 breaks out where those fundings go. About 60% goes towards community supervision services, and those are things like sex offender treatment, monitoring of people, GPS monitoring, as well as drug court testing and services. There's also community supervision operations, which includes DPP offices, and the communication equipment that they use, especially now during COVID times, to complete their work. The proposed budget, like I mentioned, is $111.7 million, and the difference between the working appropriation is $2 million. The largest changes come in the personnel expenses section, with turnover adjustments adding $3.3 million and regular earnings adjustments taking out $1.5 million, for a net increase of $1.8 million for personnel spending. Now, this is not necessarily what we would expect looking at the personnel data, because there are increasing vacancies in the department. The current vacancy rate for this function is 15%, and the current required vacancy rate to meet budgeted turnover is 12%. So there are 37 positions that are overprovided for in this budget if you use the current vacancy rate, and that would equate to about $2.7 million in additional funding. Now, going to speak on vacancy rates, there are currently about 129 agent vacancies within this division. That's both supervision agents for criminal supervision and the drinking driver monitor program. They have steadily increased over the calendar year, and they are similar to levels seen in fiscal 2020. Now, moving towards the performance evaluation, this exhibit shows the number of total cases that were supervised, and there's a 4% decrease from fiscal 2019. That's consistent with national trends as well as trends from the past few years. And this continues to decline because of the COVID-19 crisis. When we look at regional caseload ratios between the number of, for the number of cases that each agent is supervising, the statewide ratio is 74 cases per agent, and that varies between 56 in Baltimore and 86 in the West region. Now, the cases in Baltimore are much more complicated than the cases elsewhere in the state, and that's mostly due to the number or the variety of services as well as dispositions that judges can assign offenders to, specifically in Baltimore City, whereas people in the West region tend to have less intensive supervision over them. So those caseload ratios make sense. And it is a vast improvement over 2019 levels. As you can see, the caseload ratio decreased by 10 cases per agent on average between these two fiscal years. Now, the next issue we wanted to talk about is parole hearings. So if many of you are familiar with the governor's executive order that came at the beginning of the pandemic, and it directed the Maryland Parole Commission to review all of the parole cases and see if any could be released expeditiously. Now, even though they had this direction, as you can see in Exhibit 6, there were far fewer parolees granted parole in fiscal 2020 than in fiscal 2019, and that's for both state and local parole hearings. So we are asking MPC to discuss the parole hearings that they held during the pandemic and explain why they released fewer inmates on parole in 2020 than in 2019, despite being directed to expedite release where possible. So for this analysis, we have two recommended actions. The first is a report that we've required in past years. This requires the department to report on caseload ratios between the different regions and nationally. There's also an addition this year, which requires them to discuss the new hires, separations, and number of vacancies for this function. There's also a second recommended action, which is to delete $2 million in general funds. That's related to the 2.75 excess personnel funding that we identified, and the fact that there's an overall $2 million increase between the working and the allowance, which would allow this extra bit to be taken. There's also an update that I'd point your attention to for drug testing that we discussed last year. This update summarizes the response from the department in their joint chairman's report response. But I don't necessarily have much to say on that, so I'll give the floor for questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for our budget analyst, Mr. Jacob Cash? Let me get to my hands raised here. I see that we have a question from our Senate counterpart, Chairman McCray, so I will yield to you and any senators that you may want to call on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cash, if I can get your attention to page 4, it looks like it's a decrease in pre-release services for men at Threshold. Could you just elaborate on what Threshold is?
Right. Threshold is transitional housing in Baltimore City that provides both housing and pre-release and re-entry services or opportunities for offenders there. So this reduction in funding reflects that fewer people are able to be staying there, partially because of the COVID-19 pandemic and partially because of just reducing cases overall. But again, the department may have more information on why they made the decision to reduce funding specifically at Threshold.
Anybody here know anything about Zoom?
Well, the IT.
Thank you.
So let me ask you.
Yes. Tell them to come here immediately if you don't mind.
I just want to reiterate the need for everyone to make sure that their microphone is muted so we don't have any carryover background audio. So if you can just make sure, if you're not speaking, to just make sure that microphone is muted because we are streaming live. Thank you so much. Chairman McCray, did you have anything further, or from the Senate side? I don't see any other hands raised, and I don't see any from the House side. So at this point, thank you very much, Mr. Cash. We will now call on our agency representatives. That is the Honorable Robert L. Green, Secretary of Public Safety. Ms. Martha Danner, Director of Division of Parole and Probation. Mr. David Bloomberg, Chairman of the Maryland Parole Commission. Ms. Rachel Sessa, Chief of Staff for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. Mr. Christopher McCauley, Deputy Secretary of Administration of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. Secretary Green, welcome, and you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Haynes, Chairman McCray, members of PSC&E and PSA. Secretary Robert Green sends his sincere apologies. He truly wished to be joining us today, but he's dealing with a family matter currently. He does look forward to appearing before your esteemed subcommittees in the following weeks on our other budget committees.
Right.
But for the record, my name is Rachel Sessa. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Department of Public Safety. And as the Chairman kindly indicated, with me today virtually is the Deputy Secretary of Administration, Chris McCauley, Martha Danner, who's the Director of the Division of Parole and Probation, Mr. David Bloomberg, who's the Chairman of the Parole Commission. I'd like to thank DLS for their ongoing collaboration with our agency. I also appreciate Mr. Cash's hard work and his thoughtful analysis. In the DLS analysis, the DLS asked the department to respond to 4 issues, as well as 2 recommended actions. You should have our written testimony before you, so I'll try to keep my comments brief today. I would, however, like to start by addressing the recommended actions and then respond to the issues. We do actually have a few visuals that our Deputy Secretary of Administration is able to present. So I would ask at this time for your wonderful staff to allow him the ability to co-host so he can present those.
If we can.
Rachel, could you give me that name one more time, please?
Absolutely. It's Christopher McCauley.
Oh, McCauley, okay. PPSCS.
And he's ready to go.
Thank you so much. The department concurs with the first recommended action, which is a reporting requirement. The second recommended action is a different story. The department respectfully but strongly disagrees with the proposed $2 million budget cut. We disagree for several reasons, but there are 4 in particular. 1, the cut doesn't take into account the department's actual spending patterns. 2, it doesn't factor in our current vacancy trends for 2020. 3, the cut would actually inhibit our ability to continue filling frontline vacant positions. And 4, it seems to negate the legislative intent previously expressed regarding how important it is that the department continue to fill our frontline vacant positions. To expand upon this a bit, DLS appears to be comparing the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget with the fiscal year 2021 budget and not the department's actual spending patterns. This chart that appears before you, it's also included in our written testimony, illustrates the department's actual spending in relation to fiscal year 2020 allocation and fiscal year 2021 allocation. Specifically, you can see that blue dotted line, it represents actual spending, and the bar to the right demonstrates the impact of the proposed DLS reduction. As the chart illustrates, if the recommended action were to be adopted, this would cut salaries below actual spending levels. Additionally, over the past few years, the department has been successful in its hiring efforts. We closed out 2020 with the largest number of hires over the past 6 years, which is remarkable given the unprecedented times and challenges. In 2020, the department promoted 56 positions within the Division of Parole and Probation, which is a significant amount of work. This process did create vacancies in the lower classifications because as you were promoted into a new classification, it left that remaining pin vacant. So those pins needed to be backfilled. However, our Human Resources Services Division worked diligently to recruit and hire new community supervision agents. We're kicking off 2021 in a very strong position. We are in the process of onboarding 30 new DPP agents. An additional 58 are in the pipeline for frontline Agent 1 positions. So when you factor in these 30 additional hires, our community supervision January 2021 vacancy rates will actually decrease from 188 to 158, which is below January 2020 levels as illustrated by this graph. This recommended action, if adopted, will require the department to hold an additional 37 frontline P&P agent positions vacant through the fiscal year 2022 budget. To do so seems again to go a bit against the direction that we've received previously to continue working diligently to fill our vacant positions, especially these frontline staff. And we are extremely proud of the incredible work of the men and women of this agency, and including community supervision during this worldwide health crisis. So for these reasons, we respectfully request that you reject recommended action 2, again, which would cut $2 million from community supervision's budget. And with that, DSA, if you'd be so kind to stop presenting, and I'll continue by responding to the issues that we were asked to address. So to circle back to the issues, DLS asks us to comment on 4 different issues. First, DLS asks the department to comment on whether COVID-19 has driven changes in certain DPP expenses, including security guards, travel expenses, and overtime. On March 30th, as you know, the governor issued the stay-at-home order, which directed all Maryland residents to stay at home except under limited circumstances. So in response, DPP closed field offices to the public at the close of business on March 31st and transitioned to telework and remote supervision. The department rapidly deployed additional smartphones, tablets, laptops, and mobile hotspot devices to ensure connectivity and enable staff to work efficiently remotely. Certain in-person functions that were critical to maintain the mission of the Division of Parole and Probation continued with stringent PPE protocols in place. In mid-June 2020, DPP reopened its offices with a modified schedule. This included longer business hours to better adhere and better allow access to the offenders that they supervise. All individuals reporting to an office were scheduled in a fashion consistent with social distancing and guidelines issued by the Department of Health and CDC. Given the increased utilization of telework and modified utilization of office space, DPP experienced a decrease in reliance on security guards. Travel expenses also decreased as DPP personnel were able to transition and utilize more virtual platforms for training, conferences, and meetings. However, the Division of Parole and Probation did experience an increase in overtime expenses in fiscal year 2021. And this was primarily attributable to the premium pay established by DBM during the onset of the pandemic. The second issue DLS asked the department to comment on is our efforts for hiring over the past year, which I touched on previously. The ongoing pandemic has certainly had an impact on every facet of the agency's operations, including our hiring efforts. However, we were able to pivot and adjust with incredible speed, which is reflected towards the end of 2020 and into the current year. As you know, the state went into a hiring freeze, but we were very appreciative as parole and probation agents 1 and 2 and supervisors were exempted from the hiring freeze process. We transitioned into a virtual hiring process, which actually increased our efficiencies. So we had 4 new recruitments for DPP in calendar year 2020 and 2 that carried over from the fall of 2019. And as I previously mentioned, we're in the process of onboarding 30 new DPP agents with an additional 58 in the pipeline. In fact, we've got an academy starting next week and 3 more planned for 2021 with the capacity to expand as we hire additional agents. The third issue the DLS asked us to comment on is the impact of COVID-19 on agent caseload ratios and community supervision work in general. The department submitted a joint chairman's report regarding caseload ratios to the budget committees in September of 2020. I think at the time we were probably approximately 7 months into the pandemic. And in our report, we noted that statewide caseload averages were 74 cases per agent at the end of FY 2020, which is below the national average. Currently, the caseload average is 61 cases per agent, and we continue to monitor this. They are a bit higher for DDM, considerably higher for DDMP agents. In terms of the impact of COVID-19 on supervision work generally, DPP too took quick and swift action. And as I mentioned previously, drastically modified operations while continuing to carry out its mission of supervising individuals who are paroled, on probation, or released under mandatory supervision from a correctional facility. Agents began utilizing PPE and adapting office protocols in March and increased the use of remote contact methods. DPP agents and supervisors have continued conducting home visits and following social distancing guidelines. From the course of late March through December 31st, 2020, DPP agents made nearly 25,000 home contacts, over 11,000 community contacts, and 12,500 employment contacts, which is extremely commendable under these incredibly difficult times. The fourth and final issue DLS asked the department to comment on relates to the Parole Commission and the number of inmates granted parole in fiscal year 2020. I'm going to make a couple of points here, and I don't know if Chairman Blumberg will be able to chime in or not. I know he may be experiencing some technical difficulties, but I think I should be able to cover this as best as possible. At the onset of the pandemic, the Division of Correction in Maryland's local jails quickly limited access to outside visitors and non-essential personnel to mitigate the spread, as we know the vectors are coming in from the outside. The Parole Commission was able to adapt quickly and move to a virtual platform as well, conducting hearings over video and telephone. The Commission continued to conduct these hearings extremely effectively. While the number of paroles awarded in 2020 was smaller than the prior year, let's be clear, this was a decrease of 20 paroles, representing a 1.7 reduction in the individuals paroled. Impacts of the Justice Reinvestment Act, COVID-related court closures, and an increase in inmates declining parole all contributed to this 1.7% reduction. The Justice Reinvestment Act has been remarkably successful in diverting low-risk, non-violent offenders from incarceration and into community-based treatment and programs, which is exactly what we had hoped to see with the JRA. This is certainly evident in the steep decline seen in Maryland's prison population over the past several years. The prison population that remains in the DOC skews to a more violent and high-risk population than before the implementation of JRA. In addition, the JRA established something called the administrative release process. The number of incarcerated individuals who are released through the administrative release process, which I should note is actually administered by the Parole Commission, those aren't included in the overall parole figures. So all around, JRA has had an impact on the number of incarcerated individuals who are paroled. Court-related closures also had an impact. The Parole Commission is restricted in its decision-making ability when conducting a parole hearing for an inmate who still has charges pending in a Maryland court. We work very closely with the courts. We've been holding monthly meetings with the courts, with the judiciary, and we enjoy a great collaboration. But their closures for safety and security reasons during the pandemic did impact the ability of the Parole Commission to make certain parole decisions. Additionally, parole grant rates declined at local detention centers. I think it's illustrated in one of the graphs in the DLS analysis, because increasingly higher number of local detention center inmates decline parole themselves. Inmates at local jails who are released after accumulating diminution credits don't have to be supervised by DPP in the community post-release. Whereas inmates at local jails who are paroled, they are required to be supervised by DPP for the remainder of their sentence. So increasingly, inmates at local jails refuse parole and would simply rather be straight released. And with that, I don't know if Chairman Blumberg is able to, I know he may be.
Yes, I'm here. I can't get my camera on. So you're all missing my my outfit today, which is even better than last year's. So I might walk down to Martha Danner's office, who's below me. So I can actually see y'all, but it's good to see you all, even though you can't see me so far. This is my 35th time appearing before either the Senate or House Budget Committees, Community Supervision, and the Parole Commission. And very rarely do I comment on a recommended action, but I wanted to join Chief Sessa to reiterate opposition to the recommended action too. Since the pandemic started in March, both agencies have quickly reacted to a changing dynamic and have worked tirelessly to meet the goals of our missions. The recommendations seem to contradict what our agencies have been instructed to do in the past. Please allow us to continue doing what we need to do to make timely, well thought out release decisions and a strong community supervision component. I really think it's important. I've been doing this job an awful long time, and I really believe that this would not be the proper juncture to cut $2 million, particularly from DPP's budget. And we're proud of the fact we haven't missed any hearings since March, any. We're doing all of them either by video or by telephone. I'm proud of the staff who comes in, the staff who are teleworking, and commissioners and hearing officers. And we're very proud of what we've been able to do so far. The administrative refusals that we're facing because of the courts not in session is drastically affecting our parole numbers, because we're not getting people to parole because they're not being sentenced, because they're not having court hearings being held. And as Rachel Sessa mentioned, with diminution credits and local detention centers being so generous, most people, unless they're on probation, don't even want to get paroled in locals because they don't want to be monitored by a DPP agent.
If I could, Chairman Blumberg, I see that Chairman McCray has his hand raised for a question. Chairman McCray, you can go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had 3 questions in reference to what was going from the report that was given. Could you also comment on threshold? I saw that there was a cut, but I just didn't understand the cut that was made, or didn't want to assume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Threshold is a community adult rehabilitation center that the agency has a contract for, and it was a reduction in the amount of the contractual services. one of the things to keep in mind is that the agency has been expediting placements on home detention. And actually for calendar year 2020, in comparison to calendar year 2019, we've increased placements on home detention by 155, by more than 155%. So we also have been utilizing home detention as a mechanism to allow for individuals who are eligible to be released from incarceration and electronically monitored in their homes. And so we did reduce the amount of contract for threshold. That was an action that was approved by the Board of Public Works. They were certainly impacted by COVID-19. We've had a relationship with threshold that's been very successful for the past 30 years. And we anticipate that successful relationship to continue. And again, we have increased utilization of home detention as well.
Thank you. My second question is, as of the UB study, it says that 81 is the recommended caseload ratio. And it looks like you all are going in the right direction for each and every region, but it still looks like the Western region above the 81 ratio. If you could speak to the plan or how you all continue to navigate decreasing those numbers as you did this past year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Absolutely. In terms of caseload ratios, there are certain things that are kind of important to keep in mind. One is the specialized nature and how we supervise those specialized caseloads, the ones that are higher risk. And they need to have a lower caseload ratio because they're more intensive and require additional supervision or perhaps more interventions, whereas the lower risk caseloads may not require as much, the caseload ratio can be a bit higher. So when you're looking at, it's difficult to compare regionally because in Baltimore City or in the central region, we may have a higher number of individuals that are higher risk that may need to be on a more intensive caseload review and have a higher caseload ratio than perhaps in the Western region. And we do, and the Division of Parole and Probation, the leadership absolutely reviews to make sure to see if we need to transfer certain positions to really balance that out. They absolutely take those actions. I think some of which we provided in the report, and we would be more than happy with the recommended action 1 to continue to report on how we will continue to balance out those caseload ratios to make sure that they're appropriate.
And my last question, Chief of Staff Sessa, I'm not sure if you saw the testimony that was provided by AFSCME, but on the third paragraph, I'm just going to read 2 sentences. The Drinking Driver Monitor Program hasn't held a new monitor academy for several years due to lack of recruitment. It also talked about caseloads as high as 300. If you could just comment.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for that question. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, absolutely. The drinking driving monitor caseload ratio is higher than our general criminal supervision caseload ratio. And the interesting thing about DDMP, which I think is often lost when we have these conversations, or just something that we need to just kind of highlight. I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight, and that is those are special funded positions, meaning that they're not a part of the general fund. So interestingly, when we're considering the DLS recommended action for the $2 million cut, that would actually take away from those general fund DPP positions because the DDMP are special funded through court fees and fines. And I think over the years, as those fees and fines have kind of dwindled a bit, that's impacted that classification. I know that our Human Resources Services Division make every effort to try and recruit for that class as well. I believe, and I'll have to defer to Director Danner on this, but I believe in 2020, we were able to hire a few DDMP monitors. I know that DPP has also started a pilot where the regular agents are assisting with that caseload to try and balance that out a bit. But that is absolutely an area that the agency continues to review.
Thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go back to Chairman Blumberg. I didn't want to cut your testimony or your comments off. Did you want to complete your response at this time? I guess not.
Here we are. No, I'm here.
Oh, there he is. And we see you on screen there. There we go.
Can you see me?
Yes, we do. Go right ahead.
All right. Yeah, it took a long time to find a jacket to match this tie, but I did.
You never fail us every session.
Well, I
No.
wanted to tell my good friend, Senator McCray, who served with my wife on the city election board, that she had picked out something for me to wear for the Senate. And so and it was kind of a mixture. I didn't know which to wear, so I wound up wearing the one for the House. But,
There you go.
but I showed her, she said, I think, well, excuse me calling you your first name. She said, I think Corey would like the other one better. So I apologize to you because I think you would have liked the other one better. But this is more like Keith because Keith's older. And Keith, he remembers Peter Max and all that. And this is kind of what Peter Max was. Well,
all right. You never disappoint.
No, I try not to. No, I finished what I wanted to say about the recommended actions, just because, I mean, I've been doing this since 2003, and usually we go along with the recommended actions, and I think Jacob did a good job, but I really believe that this agency's worked very hard to try to fill vacancies and especially allow upward movement, and it affects the Division of Parole and Probation far more than it affects the Parole Commission. But I just think we're really doing a good job under difficult times. And the lady to my left is the 7th head of DPP since I've been here that I work with, and she doesn't stop working. And that's great to see. And no, I'd really finished everything that I had to say.
Okay, thank you so much. Rachel, Chief of Staff, Sessa, did you want to continue at this time?
Actually, that concluded my remarks,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. So again,
Okay.
we're happy to continue taking questions of the committees.
Okay. I see on the House side we have Delegate Acevera. You can go ahead and ask your question when you're ready, Delegate.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Sessa, for your presentation. I just have a quick question, and I was curious as to what cases are being included in the calculation for the caseload assessments. Can you just explain that to me?
Thank you, Delegate, for that question. And Director Danner, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of the caseload ratio, they are our criminal supervision, our criminal caseload. So it would be everything absent the drinking driver monitor program caseload ratio.
That is correct.
Okay. I don't see any additional questions from members of the subcommittee on the House side. Before I ask whether there are any on the Senate side, Chairman McCray, I do have one or two questions I just wanted to follow up on, and it relates to the caseloads and hiring. Last year, we heard testimony about the caseloads that monitors were having. Even though they were meeting the caseloads recommended numbers, the amount of substantive time they were able to spend with an individual was very short. I mean, in some cases we heard testimony that they were only able to spend maybe 5 minutes at most with an individual before they just had to leave to go to check on another individual. So my question goes to the amount of substantive time that's being spent with an individual in order for them to meet their projected number or their numbers, I guess, as far as contact is concerned. Has that improved at all within since the last time we met, which will be about this time last year on this subject matter? If you could speak to that, I would appreciate it. And at the same time, I'm gonna give you a two for one here. We also heard testimony from another briefing this morning, which you were at with the Legislative Black Caucus, and You guys did a good job in providing information on COVID-19 related issues. The question I have is, with the increased number of inmates who have been released back into the community under one of the categories which this particular agency has jurisdiction over, has that impacted the numbers at all as far as caseloads and the amount of substantive time that is needed to spend with that particular individual to get a more accurate assessment of what's going on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I may, I'm going to go ahead and try to answer those in reverse. So I'll take your second part of your two for first and then circle back to the first. With regard to caseload ratios, we've actually seen a decline in the past several months in terms of caseload ratios. Now, this could be a bit of an anomaly because of, obviously with the interruption to the courts and things of that nature. So at the end of fiscal year 2020, the caseload ratio for the criminal cases was around 72. But again, this does vary depending upon whether they're high risk or low risk in terms of the assignments of the agents. And currently, it's declined to the low 60s in terms of caseload ratio. Mm-hmm. So I think that hopefully that answers your second part. And with regard to increase in communications and contact, one of the great benefit about expanding virtual opportunities is that now there are far more ways to connect with the individual under supervision. With the addition of smartphones for the the expansion of smartphones for the agents, being able to have, to be able just to text the client under supervision, do a video call with this client under supervision, and then also to schedule based on, to schedule that in-person visit, if necessary, within the office around the client's schedule. And they actually expanded the office hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for those scheduled visits which also better accommodates the individual under supervision in terms of the time frame, because if somebody is working a 9 to 5, it may not be convenient for them to show up in person in an office, in a DPP office. Mm-hmm. So, and I certainly would defer to Director Danner in terms of any additional points she would like to make there. So I think that what we've seen, or what we've at least heard, is now there's a significantly broader range of options to enable more, even though it's virtual, FaceTime with an individual under supervision. And again, the caseload ratio has declined. And as I mentioned, we're actually in the process of onboarding 30 more agents, with 58 in the pipeline. And as we know, as we continue to fill those critical frontline positions, that assists with the caseload ratio.
Okay. Okay, Asa, did you have a substitute?
Mr. Chair, you broke up a bit there, so I didn't hear the last part. But I'm good at this time. I was just curious about what was factored into the calculation. If I have any follow-up questions, I'll ask. But I'm good. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair, I think that he talked about this. I think his internet service may be bad. You may want to step in.
Yeah.
Madam Vice Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you. Senator McCray, were you asking questions of the senators when he went out?
At this time, I see no senators with their hands raised for any questions, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the House? Seeing no questions, thank you very much for that presentation. And I think there is some written testimony that everyone has access to, but thank you very much for the presentation. I do believe that is the end of our discussion for Senator McCray.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Before we close, I just wanted to recognize all of the analysts that did a phenomenal job, Mr. Kramer and Mr. Cash. Thank you for the work that you all did with the agency reports, and just wanted to say thank you again to all of the agency heads that discussed the briefing with us today, or just on behalf of Senator Saling, Senator Peters, and Senator Edwards and myself. Thank you again, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. And I would like to also, on behalf of all House members, all delegates, say thank you and wish all of you a good evening. Thank you very much.
Madam Vice Chair, if I can interject. There are 3 members from the union who would like to testify, and I do believe that they are all on the call right as we speak.
Okay, I'm sorry I don't have that, but if we could, which one, if we could put up a hand so I would know who's, okay, Ms. Thompson.
Hi, good afternoon all. My name is Victoria Thompson. I'm the Vice President of the Executive Board of the Ask For Me Local 3661. I've been a drinking driving monitor too with the agency for over 10 years. I help to make sure those who violate their drunk driving law, violate our drinking driving laws, successfully complete the court orders of their probation. Currently, I am monitoring 210 active cases with another 22 inactive cases that I'm responsible for. A total caseload of 232 is way too high. And we have other monitors with even higher caseload in the 300s. I want to express the morale is very low, there's burnout, and it affects our ability to do what we're supposed to for the citizens of Maryland. We're not able to provide the attention and resources to our caseloads as we should. This means that recidivism goes up, our clients disengage. As I repeat, our clients disengage from the program and don't complete the court order. Overall, this means our roads are less safe and we're not protecting the public as much as we should. We need to hire more monitors. There hasn't been a new monitor academy for about 3 years. Right now, we have about approximately 56 monitors statewide who actually have caseloads assigned to them. This number should be way higher. We have also been fighting to get a senior monitor lead position like our colleagues who are parole and probation agents. As an entry-level monitor, you get hired as a monitor 1, and then generally after a year, you get a non-competitive promotion to a monitor 2, and that's the highest you can ever advance. We have an incredibly stressful high-stake job. The legislature have looked at this before, as recent as 2019 as the last time I testified, along with 4 other DDMP monitors. Parole and Probation Administration tells us that they agree that there should be a lead position, but it's just not happening. We beseech your help to retain the few monitors that we have by helping us to get this important position. And if I may add that yes, DDMP is a special program, special funded program. However, the $55 state mandated fee, it's the law. It's the law. So that means that there is money or somewhere that we should be able to increase the numbers in hiring monitors. And because we work diligently, we love our job, but we also don't have room for advancement. We have been limited in our advancement. So once again-
Ms. Thompson, could you wrap it up at this time, please?
Yes, we beseech you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman is back.
Okay. Somehow I must be psychic, I guess, because I knew something was going to happen with the internet. But at any rate, thank you so much, Madam Vice Chair. Did we have any further questions at this point? If not, I think that will conclude our.
Mr. Chair.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So sorry. We do have, that concludes our questions for our agency representatives, and we will now move to our public testimony again with Denise Gilmore with ASME. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I guess to both of you, Chairman Haynes and Chairman McCray and committee members. You just heard testimony. I'm sorry, my name is Denise Gilmore. I'm a field director with ASME Council 3. You just heard testimony from Victoria Thompson, who's on the front line as a DDMP monitor. After me, you will hear testimony from Lakeisha Davis, who is a PNP agent. But we represent 30,000 state and higher education employees, including employees in the Division of Parole and Probation. You know, our parole and probation agents and drinking driving monitors play a vital public safety role here in Maryland and are an important resource to their clients and connecting them to programs and services. Yet they only make up about 10% of the total positions in DPSCS and currently have, you know, as has been remarked, alarmingly high vacancy rate of over 15%. All of this leads to workloads that many of our members in community supervision currently consider to be unmanageable. Positions in community supervision do stay vacant for quite a long time, causing existing staff to absorb those cases and see their caseloads go up. We also take issue with how average caseload ratios are calculated. They may point to declining caseloads, but we rarely hear from our members that their workload is going down. The reality on the ground is that caseloads vary based on the type of cases the agents are assigned. And if you lump specialized cases in with general supervision cases, you're not really getting an accurate picture. Agents I've talked to are carrying general supervision cases of over 100 at times. You're also not really getting an accurate picture if you only look at active cases, as inactive cases also require the agent to continue to do some work on them. Again, you know, our member Lakeisha is going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We think that recommended budget action number 1, the report on caseloads, is a very good start. We would also like to see a better reporting mechanism of calculating caseload ratios that breaks down the types of criminal cases that accurately reflects workloads for these varying cases. We would also like to see DDMP caseloads reported with more transparency. On the topic of DDMP, we're very concerned about the staffing numbers in the drinking driving monitor program. We're concerned about the high caseloads. It's our understanding that these positions are currently in a hiring freeze. That seems short-sighted. We've heard for several years now that DDP supports the creation of a senior monitor position. We think this is an important tool in retaining staff and hope to see the department move forward on that this year. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, you know, the base salary for a DDMP Monitor 1 starts at $34,000 a year, and a Parole and Probation Agent 1 starts at $39,000 a year. We encourage the department to look at salary enhancements to help with reducing those high vacancies. All of this goes to say in conclusion that DPP needs, or community supervision needs more resources right now, not less. We have, again, I want to hand it over to, you know, Lakeisha at this point, who's going to share her experience on the front line, but I certainly thank everyone for your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name again is Lakeisha Davis. I'm an executive board member of ASME Local 3661. I am a senior agent with the Division of Parole and Probation, and I have just about 17 years of service with the DPSCS, and the last 6 being in parole and probation. I supervise a mental health caseload, which is not considered a specialized unit, although it should be. These clients, compared to general supervision clients, need more attention, help navigating services to help them be in compliance with court-ordered conditions, and they often experience mental health crises, which takes more time to resolve. I've had the caseload for about 4.5 years now, and I expressed my concerns for not being able to give the time and attention needed to my clients when my caseload reached more than 125 clients. It was unmanageable, especially if I was going to perform at the required level and give my clients quality service and support their success. After more than a year of dealing with an unreasonable number of clients, I was given the support of a second agent in my office once agents were newly assigned. There needs to be a policy put in place to make mental health a specialized caseload, as well as put a cap on the number of clients we'll serve. Secondly, the caseload equalization and caseload averages need to be of utmost importance. When caseload averages are given, consideration to specialized units such as the sex offender unit and VPI or violence prevention initiative need to be taken into account. These caseloads have maximums or limits, and also other case statuses aren't factored into those numbers. Those statuses such as non-active, additional, unavailable, and incarcerated also require attention from the agents. So management always references these active cases, but those other statuses should be paid some attention to. So right now I have about 82 active cases, but 121 total cases. So there needs to be more agents assigned so that there is some level of relief to agents across the division, especially with the current health crisis impacting how we function as agents and as offenders. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that concludes our public testimony. Madam Vice Chair, that we get everyone in?
Yes, I think we had three
Yes.
people testified.
Okay.
They've all testified.
Okay, I don't see any further questions from either subcommittee. And so seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. And just would like to thank everyone for participating virtually. And it's been pretty smooth sailing so far with our joint hearings with the budget subcommittee. And with that, we will conclude today's hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.